Dear student, this is Dr. Zahur Hussain, and today we are going to talk about the story, the plot of the Fairy Queen, written by Edmund Spenser. So today we'll see generally development of plot from initial book one, book two, and what are the main ingredients, what are the important points which are discussed in this story. So first of all, we'll see its summary. In The Fairy Queen, Spencer creates an allegory. We'll talk in detail what does this word stand for. The character of his far off, fanciful fairy queen are meant to have a symbolic meaning in the real world. In book 1 and 3rd, the poet follows the journeys of two knights, Red Cross and Britomart, and in doing so, he examines the two virtues he considers most important to Christian life: holiness and chastity. Both are very important things in Christian morality: holiness and chastity. Red Cross, the Knight of Holiness, is much like the Apostle Peter, is a sort of a saint, is a sort of prophet. That word is used for Saint Peter. So, in his eagerness to serve his Lord, he gets himself into unforeseen trouble that he is not yet virtuous enough to handle his quest to be united with Yuna, who signifies truth. Holiness cannot be attained without knowledge of Christian truth. So, in poetic language, in poetry, what we call these are the embodiment, personifications. These characters, these human characters, are personifications of certain important moral qualities, such as holiness, such as truth, and such as chastity. So, this is what we technically the term we use is personification. So, in his immature state, he mistakes falsehood for truth by following the deceitful witch Deusa. He pays for this mistake with suffering, but in the end, the suffering makes way for his recovery in the house of holiness, aided by faith, hope, and charity. So, they are written with capital letters. In fact, these are important qualities of Christian faith, and these have been made personified, or in simple words, we can say these are the embodiment that seem like that. So, with newfound strength and the grace of God, he is able to conquer the dragon that represents all the evil in the world. If you read, when we will read certain chunks from the text, we can see how the dragon has been portrayed there, how horrible its appearance is, and Spencer has delineated each and every limb of the dragon, its horrible shape, and its terror and horror that it's spreading all around. But at the same time, we can see the power, the strength used by the knight to fight with it, and consequently, finally, virtues wins and win over the over vices. So basically Fairy Queen is a fight, struggle between vice and virtue. So, in a different manner, Britomart also progresses in her virtue of chastity. So, two important things in Christian morality is charity and chastity. Charity is to give alms, to give money to the needy ones, to the deserving ones, and chastity is definitely pakbazi, to save their what you can say honor, like that. So both the things, if we you have studied the novel, the first English novel, Joseph Andrews, again we can see these two virtues have been glorified there, have been discussed there in detail one by one. Or the first one is virtue, and the charity, and the second is chastity. So she already had the strength to resist lust, but she is not ready to accept love. The love she feels when she sees a vision of her future husband in a magic mirror. She learns to incorporate chaste resistance with active love, which is what Spencer sees as true Christian love, moderation. Whereas Red Cross made his own mistake to show to us the consequences of an unholy life. It's not Britomart, but the other characters in the book third who show the destructive power of an unchaste life. So unchaste life definitely it's vice and it's immorality and it can destroy and it can be dangerous for people all around. So we go ahead. When he says unchaste, Spencer says in his preface to the poem that his goal is to show how a virtuous man should live. The theme of Book 1 and Book 3 come together in the idea that our native virtue must be augmented or transformed if it is to become true Christian virtue. Spencer has a high regard for the natural qualities of the creatures. He shows that the satire, that's half lion, half human, is the lion and many human characters have an inborn inclination toward the good, and yet he consistently uh, shows their failure when faced with the worst evils. So these evils can only be defeated by the Christian good. So throughout the poem, throughout Faerie Queene, we can see a continuous battle, a war that's going consecutively, continuously, it's there between vice and virtue. And we know that this war between vice and virtue is not new one. It's been centuries old. Since we can see Adam and Eve were created, Saturn was also there. Saturn followed them. So from then onward, we can see the world can be divided into two major things. It can be vice and it can be virtue one, and consequently, we go ahead there. So, if we can see further about the summary and little bit commentary that I'm making on it for your better understanding, high on Spencer's list of evils in the Catholic Church, and this enmity leads a political overtone to the poem, since the religious conflicts of the time were inextricably tied to politics. The poet is unashamed in his promotion of his beloved monarch, Queen Elizabeth, and he takes considerable historical license in connecting her line with the King Arthur. So, two characters, Queen Elizabeth and King Arthur, they have been glamorized. They are presented as the protagonists. They are presented as an important person, and we know that English community are traditions, and still you can see all over the world if kingship is there. It's also live in UK, where king and queen are still respected a lot. And if the king, the prince, for instance, prince, one who breaks the tradition is kicked out, is not liked. Even the masses start criticizing him because still for them, kings are their pride and they are the important persons to be followed, to be loved, to be cherished one. So they are considered very important. So he took aim at very real corruption with the Catholic Church. Such attacks were by no means unusual in his day, but his use of them in an epic poem raised his criticism about the level of propagandist. So we can see a fight between Catholics and Protestant is not new. It's centuries old, and it was very sharp. Even if we can compare it over here in our culture, the fight between Shia Sunni or Brelvi Al Hadith. So same sort of however, what we can say that our rifts are very harsher. It's not so. The rifts which exist between Catholics and the Protestants were harshest even in the context of ours. We people still can tolerate each other, but there was a zero tolerance for Catholics to tolerate Protestant, for Protestant to tolerate the Catholics at that time. So, but he was very staunch critic of Catholics. So that's why we can see all religious characters have been targeted one by one. As a purely poetic work, the Faerie Queene was neither original nor always remarkable, no, but it has a lot of substance in it. Spencer depends heavily on his Italian romantic sources. So these are the Ariosto and Tasso are actually the sources which were, as well as medieval and classical works like the Romance of the Rose and the Aeneid. It Spencer's blending of such diverse sources with a high-minded allegory or allegory, both we can use, that makes the poem unique and remarkable. So sources are basically important. For instance, if in Dr. Foster's you people have studied his source, use German folklore. Similarly, here we can see the source of Faerie Queene. It can be Italian one, it can be medieval and classical works. A lot has been borrowed, though the subject, the people were new, protagonists were his native people, his kings and queens, but sources were from the, as mentioned there, just like romantic, Italian romantic sources there. So he is able to take images from superficial romances, courtly love stories, and tragic epics alike. Aeneid is also an epic one, Virgil's epic, and give them real importance in the context of the poem. No image is let fall from Spencer's pen that does not have significance, and this gives the Faerie Queene the richness that has kept in high among the ranks of the greatest poetry in the English language. So that's why it has become one of the masterpiece, one of the important thing in English language. So after describing general overview, we come towards book one. The book one is centered on the virtue of holiness as embodied, Tajsim in simple words, in the Red Cross Night. Largely self contained, Book 1 can be understood to be its own miniature sort of epic. The Book 1 is very important. It is a mini epic, you can see. Epic, is a long narrative, and if we talk about epics, there are wars, there are great themes, and then there are great heroes, and a lot of bloodshed is there. The towering characters are there, just like Paradise Lost, and just like we can say initial epics from Gilgamesh, the first epic onwards. We can see a lot of thing. Homer's epic is there. Virgil's is there, so Virgil's Aeneid is there. So these are basically having certain high themes where there are fights of gods, where there are certain important issues, very important issues are there, which are discussed one by one. So this book also follows suit. It's next. It's in itself some sort of, we can say, important part. The Red Cross Knight and his lady Una travel together as he fights the monster Error. Then separately after the wizard Archimago tricks the Red Cross Knight into thinking that Una is unchaste, using a false dream, and he leaves. So temptation is there. Temptation is most of the time negative attraction. So the knight has been tempted negatively, and then he faces the Red Cross. Knight meets Deusa. This is a sort of witch. She negatively attracts and creates problem. Who feigns distress in order to entrap him. So trap, he's trapped, and it's we can see in real life too. People, heroes are sometimes distracted and trapped. The Deusa leads the Red Cross Knight to captivity by the giant Ogo Ogogolio. Meanwhile, Yuna overcomes peril. I mean, she comes out of that trouble, meets Arthur, and finally, Arthur is there, and finally finds the Red Cross Knight and rescues him from his capture. So it's just like fairy. In fairy tales, we can see there is a giant, there is a fairy, and there are ogres, and there are certain characters, and sometimes the character is captured, and giant can capture and can keep it in some sort of trouble, and then some hero comes, and then some helper is there, and the story goes on, and finally we can say the victory falls to hero, and he gets rid of that captivity, and the person is taken out and saved. So from Diusa and from despair. Actually, Diusa, despair, these are the personifications of, we can say, negativity. These are the personification of, we can say, evils, problems, troubles like that. Una and Arthur helped the Red Cross Knight recover in the House of Holiness, where the house's ruler, Celia, and her three daughters, joining them, there is Red Cross Knight sees a vision of his future. He then returns Yuna to her parents' castle and rescues them from a dragon. And the two are betrothed and resisting Archimago once and time. So they are engaged, and then they are legally, we can say, over there. So, book second is centered on the virtue of temperance as embodied in Sir Guillaume, who is tempted by fleeing Archimago into nearly attacking the Red Cross Knight. So, Guillaume discovers a woman killing herself out of the grief for having her lover tempted and bewitched by the witch Acrasia and killed. So again, witches are there. Witches are unholy. Witches are most of the times tempting. Witches create troubles, and throughout we can see. So on his quest starts and stops fighting several evil, rash and trick knights by and meets Arthur. Finally, they come to Acracia's island and Bower of Bliss, where Gion resists temptations to violence, idleness, and lust. And he captures Acracia in a net, destroys the boar, and rescues those imprisoned trees. So it's just like a fairy, imaginary tales. So there is a giant, and the person is captured, and then he needs a sport, and the sport is there. There is problem. The story is set. People go, they fight, and finally it's virtue that conquers, and the vice is dominated by virtue at the end. But initially, we can say apparently it's vice that is powerful. So now we move towards the short summary of book third. Though we are basically concerned with book one, but it's important. It's incumbent on you to also know the story of book one, book two, and book three. So book third is central to the virtue of chastity, as embodied in Britomart. A lady knight resting after the events of Book Second, Gaon and Arthur meet Britomart, who wins joust with Gaon. They separate as Arthur and Gaon leave to rescue Florimel, where Britomart rescues the Red Cross Knight. Britomart reveals to the Red Cross Knight that she is pursuing Sir Artigel, because she is destined to marry him. The Red Cross Knight defends Artigel, and they meet Marilyn, who explains more carefully Britomart's destiny to find the English monarchy. Kingship. Britomart leaves and fights Sir Marinel. Arthur looks for Florimel, joined later by Sir Saturn and Britomart, and they witness and resist sexual temptation. Britomart separates from them and meets Sir Scudamore, looking for his captured lady Amorid. So Britomart alone is able to rescue Amorid from wizard, witch and wizard. Both are negative one. For male it's wizard, and for female it's me. So unfortunately, when they emerge from the castle, Scudamore is gone. So this is the old version of the books, but anyhow it has the same sort of story, that there is a fight between vice and virtue, and the things are embodiment. So book fifth describes the legend of Camille and the Telamount or friendship. Camille's companion in book fifth is actually named Tramond, and the plot does not center on the friendship. The two men appear only briefly in the story. The book is largely a continuation of events begun in book third. First, Scudamore is convinced by the hag at a discord that Britomart has run off with Omrid and became jealous. A 3-day tournament is then held. Tournament is actually a fight. Now it's for plaything, but initially it was for life games. So is there then held by Saturn and where Britomart beats Artigel both in disguise. So Scudamore and Artigal unite against Britomart, but when her helmet comes off in the Battle of Article falls in love with her and he surrenders, removes his helmet, and Britomart recognizes him as the man in the enchanted mirror. Article pledges his love to love her, but must first leave and complete his quest. So Scudamore, upon discovering Britomart's sex, realizes his mistake and asks after his lady, but this time Britomart has lost Amrut, and she and Scudamore embark together on a search for her. The reader discovers that Amrut was abducted by a savage man and is imprisoned in his cave. One day, Amrit darts out past the savage and is rescued from him by the squire Timaeus and Belphobia. Arthur then appears, offers his service as a knight to the lost wisdom. She accepts, and after a couple of trials on the way, Arthur and Amrit finally happen across Codamore and Britomore. The two lovers are reunited, wrapping up a different plot line from book second. The recent recovered Myrtle discovers Florimel is suffering and protests Dragon. He returns home and becomes sick with love and pity. Eventually, he confesses his feelings to his mother and she pleads with Neptune to have the girl released, which the god grants. So gods are also there, the help, the need of help we can see can also be found. So we can see book 5 and book 6, they have centered on the virtue of justice as embodied, and book 6 is centered on the virtue of courtesy. So all important, courtesy is there, chastity is there, holiness is there, all these things are there one. So that was a brief introduction of the type of story we people studied there. So thank you.